Hey everyone, Coach Joel here. And today I have an interesting hand, and it's one of those kind of routine spots that come up often where a bad turn card comes, you're forced to pot control, and then you're left with kind of a marginal decision on the river. So let's dive in and see if there's anything we could have done differently here. So we are dealt pocket nines under the gun, pretty standard open. This is a 5-10 game, and we make it 40. It's a little big. Usually I go 3x, but 4x can work in some games where players are a little looser and they're willing to call with worse for this price. So, anyways, folds around, and the big blind makes the call. Don't have too much information on this player, but in general, at the 5-10 level, I'd assume that the big blind is calling here with around 20% of hands. Usually they won't have aces or kings. Obviously, they would have three bet those hands. You may be surprised sometimes because you raised under the gun. The big blind will just flat with some strong hands here, like jacks, queens once in a while, maybe even ace king once in a while. But a lot of those will still three bet you, and then you're left with a lot of hands that are getting a good price. They're closing the action, like suited connector, suited dapper type hands, down to like 4 or 5 suited that want to see a flop and see if they can crack you. Here we go to the flop, and our nines are an overpair. It's pretty solid board for us. We decide to bet 60, and we are called. I like the sizing here, close to 2/3 pot, actually a little bit above that. It's good size to get value from heart draws, any 7x that's in the big blind's range, and then a lot of things that they might deal with, like wheel draws, ace three, suited, ace five suited, open enders like 5-6 suited, even weaker pairs like pocket eights, pocket sixes. So I think when called here, we're generally in good shape, and we are definitely ahead of the big blind's range. So, but it's never easy. That's why we analyze these hands, and let's see what happens. So we make the bet. It is called, and turn is a six of hearts. One other thing that I would say is that when we were just flatted from out of position on this wet board, it's less likely that our opponent has a hand like twos or fours now. Once in a while, players get it, they like to be trappier with top set. But even with top set, I'd expect that to be raising here a good amount of the time, given that, the idea of blocking top pair isn't that relevant when, we are raising from under the gun and we have a ton of overpairs here. So I'd expect the sets to be raising the vast majority of the time. So when we get to the turn, I'm not thinking that my opponent has a set. However, they are now uncapped again. Uncapped meaning they can have the very strongest of hands because the six of hearts brings in the flush. And on a low board like this, the big blind does have a ton of flush combos. On with boards where the cards are higher, they'll have less combos because, like for instance, if the ace of hearts were on the board, they couldn't have all those ace x of heart type hands that players love to play. But on this type of board, ton of suited Broadway hands have just made flushes, a lot of ace x of hearts. So the big blind here may have as many as 20 or 25 flush combos that just got there, and so we need to respect that. And when they check to us, we should be checking back. It's still possible that they have a hand like pocket sixes, pocket eights, a seven, but we need to kind of play pot control in the event that they have a flush. And we also can't really bet our hand again either because they may be worried that we have a flush. So it's going to be really hard to get value from pocket eights anymore. And also, I misspoke on pocket sixes. They just turned a set. So one of the hands that we were beating pre-flop has now improved. This is all around just a miserable turn card, and it's time to pot control. And So they check to us and we do check back. Good job. And the river is the 7 of clubs, definitely an interesting card. And now the big blind leads for 85, a little bit more than a third of the pot. So we are getting, roughly 4-1 on the call, a little bit worse than that. So we need about, between 20 and 25% equity here. Let's call it 22% equity. And so we need to think about what types of hands here can we beat? And there really aren't that many combos of bluffs that are in the big blind's range when they lead out. Generally, we're getting such a good price, so it's tempting to just pay off the 85 and just see what they have. But resist the urge, because these small pots do add up, and over time making these decisions and not giving into curiosity or whatever will ultimately pay off. So can we have the best hand 22% of the time here? Well, what bluffs can the big blind have? Maybe ace 3 suited and ace 5 suited that aren't in hearts. So 3 of ace 3 suited and 3 of ace 5 suited. That's 6 combos. I don't think that. You'll have to know your opponent pretty well here. Some players, they will bet when they shouldn't here. They'll bet a hand like, a 6 or 3s or 5s, just because they don't want to check and have you bet and not know where they're at and all this. But a solid thinking player will probably check those medium strength hands and evaluate after you make your move. I also would be less inclined to expect this type of blocking bet after you check back the turn, because they shouldn't necessarily be worried you're going to bet the river, because you've already checked back the turn and have shown signs of slowing down in the hand. So I wouldn't see the need to be making some sort of blocker bet with like a pair that's lower than yours. I just don't think that that's what's really in the betting range here. I think that what we're going to see here is a lot of 7x and a lot of flushes that are now betting smaller because the board just paired. So like I said, there's maybe 6 bluff combos, and there's probably 20 to 25 heart combos plus 7x. Ace 7 suited is definitely in their range. 6-7 suited, just river to full house. They may even have 6-8 suited completing from the big blind. Excuse me, 7-8 suited. 7-9 suited is a possibility as well. It depends kind of how loose your opponent is. The real problem with this hand is, again, there's just not a whole lot of air that your opponent can have to be bluffing with. Those 2 hands that I mentioned really are it, unless you have the type of opponent that would float, like reverse float with just like the ace of hearts and nothing else, with the plan to bluff the river. But again, I generally, when you see that play, you don't see this small of a sizing. Like this small is, generally like begging for a call from a medium strength hand like what you have. And I would just expect if someone's going to try to rep the nut flush with the ace of heart blocker, they'd be going closer to the side of the pot here. So all in all, I think we're in bad shape, even though we're getting such a good price. The price is ultimately kind of irrelevant when, if your opponent's like almost never bluffing, then your pot odds really don't matter. Because, take it to the extreme. If the opponent is never bluffing, then you should always fold. Like there's no real math to figure out here. And I just don't see that many bluff combos. And we can verify that actually in Flopzilla after we see the hand resolve. So ultimately, 85, we do pay it off out of curiosity. We get shown the bad news. 7-8 suited makes perfect sense. I would say that, if you're going to be curious in this spot with 9s, maybe you make the call when you have a 9 of hearts in your hand. It's just an additional blocker, removes a few flush combos from your opponent. I also wouldn't feel the need to necessarily call with nines here. We do have a lot of better hands. You know, we may not have like flushes because we checked back the turn. Maybe we have, you know, like queens, kings, aces that we can call with. And again, nines through jacks where we're holding a heart, I think would all be better calls than this one. So we don't have to be overextending in this type of spot. But with that said, let me show you kind of what occurred in Flopzilla just for one other angle on this. So as mentioned before, I would assume that the opponent is calling in the big blind, typical 5-10 opponent. Whether this is the correct range or not, this is kind of the range that people seem to play against an under the gun open. You may be surprised, like I said, there may be some ace king. I gave this half weight because I think ace king sometimes will respect an under the gun raise. They're out of position. Maybe they do just flat half the time. Queens maybe half the time. Depends on your opponent, but we'll just leave in half the combos of queens, for instance. And twos through jacks, I think, are squarely in this player's range, and some of these, suited hands. So just with this assumption in mind, not knowing much about the player, when we got a board of it was 7 of, let's go back, the 7 of spades, deuce of hearts, 4 hearts. Plug that in, 7 of spades, deuce of hearts, 4 of hearts. And we bet the flop. We were assuming that the opponent would continue with basically any weak pair, any gut shot, any pair, any draw, essentially. Let's just make that really baseline assumption. So again, we're doing well on the flop. On the turn, it brings in a miserable card for us, 6 of hearts. And by the way, on the flop, I would discount 2s, 4s, and 7s because they haven't raised us. So, maybe I'll say that now only a quarter of those combinations are still in hand, but pretty much everything else would have raised. So they have less sets, but now 6 of hearts brings in a lot of their flush combinations. You can see that 22 combos just made a flush. So we check back, and then the river was a 7. I believe it was the 7 of clubs. And when they bet into us, you can see very clearly for this size, if they're betting 3 of a kind or better, as mentioned, there are just a lot of flush combos. There are full houses, quads, and 3 of a kind, 3 of those. And they only have those 6 bluff combinations of eights high that I mentioned. So when we only have 16% equity, we need 22%. So this should probably be a fold. The other annoying thing is that for this size, they could even be betting a hand like jacks or queens with a heart in them. And so if they're betting jacks and queens and, again, small size, maybe they want to get a little bit of value out of hands like what we have. Our equity is even worse at 13%. Even if you make the argument they never have queens, it's a player that's always going to 3-bet queens. If they ever lead jacks for this size, we're still under 15% on the river. So tough hand, one of those kind of annoying in-between spots that you face a lot in poker, but I really think that making the right decision in these small spots repeatedly is ultimately what adds up to big wins over time. So I hope you liked it. Definitely leave your feedback and look for more of these from me soon. Thanks.